Hello everyone, it's Monday the 7th of December and welcome to episode 98 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. Christmas is on its way, as is our special end of 2020 big farming quiz of the year. Watch this space. And I just want to thank you all for listening to and supporting the show throughout this year. It has been a crazy year for so many reasons, but honestly, it's been brilliant to have you along on the podcast route with me. So thanks for carrying on listening. Right, let's dive straight into this week's feature.
Meet the Farmers Friends.
This evening, I am speaking to a non-farmer, but someone who, in my mind, is one of the most creative, hardworking and well-connected people I know working in the rural sector. Jane Craigie heads up the team at Jane Craigie Marketing, a marketing, media and communications business based in Scotland and focused on the rural sector and food and farming businesses. She's a chartered marketeer with over 25 years experience in marketing within the agri-food sector. She's a member of the executive board of the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists and the Council of the British Guild of Agricultural Journalists, and a former chair of that as well. She's a board member for Lantra, a professional agriculturalist with the Institute of Agricultural Management, and a member of Ringlink Scotland. She's also a director and co-founder of the Rural Youth Project, which we have talked about on several occasions on the show in the past, but I'm looking forward to going into more detail on it with Jane tonight. Jane, thanks so much for coming on the show. Honestly, this is such a pleasure having you here. I've been looking forward to this evening for quite a while now.
Oh, thank you, Ben. I love your podcast. You and Will Will Evans during lockdown have just been such a tonic. Out on a bike, out on a pony, or running around the lanes. You're my go-to.
It's very kind of you to say. I mean, let's actually maybe start with that. From a personal point of view and a professional point of view as well, how has COVID and the various lockdowns been for you?
Well, it kind of feels like it's been going on forever, doesn't it? I'm a real optimist, and I think I look at the good that's coming out of it and the good that I hope will come out of it. So for me, the upsides have been that I think actually we've been communicating more. It's been a very good time for communicators. And I think there's been a lot of humanity about COVID. You know, we've connected with people that we may not have connected with normally. I think sectors like food and farming and also healthcare that really should be in the limelight really have been in the limelight. So for me, all of those things and learning and listening about, the consequences of COVID has been absolutely fascinating. I'm a really inquisitive person, so that has been, just the brain fuel's been incredible. From a business point of view, it's been tumultuous. We have gained more than we have lost, and I think that's probably down to just being present. Being present for people, offering to help out if somebody needed some help, like David Hill when he set up his online ag show.
Yeah,
I thought that was amazing.
Absolutely. That was a real highlight of the year, actually. Yeah.
It was. So we've been there for people. It's been really tough on the team. I've got a young team, and we're a fun business. And so, time together is really important. And young people in particularly, I think they've really felt, well, I know they have really felt the pain of being isolated at home. So yeah, a tumultuous time, but I think generally good.
Let's talk about where you are. So you're based in Aberdeenshire. Tell listeners about the area, because certainly from a farming perspective, it's pretty diverse.
Yeah, it is, Ben. It's a very very beautiful area, and it's a very diverse area. So we've got a lot of coastline in Aberdeenshire. So we're a seafood county as well as an agrarian county.
Yeah, very relevant at the moment for the next few weeks.
Exactly. So fishing, farming, a lot of iconic food and drink producers in this area, distilleries. Beef is our big red meat sector. But in terms of farming, arable, a lot of spring cropping, veg, potatoes, and then we have some soft fruit. So it's a really good part of the world for growing soft fruit. A lot of a lot of sheep and beef. The two sectors that really don't show very much in this region are pigs and dairy. Dairy has just been decimated. But yeah, so a very, very diverse region for farming.
You had quite a unique childhood. Spent a lot of time abroad, including time in India, in Cyprus, in Turkey. Tell me about your life growing up.
Well, I think I was incredibly lucky. My dad was a spy. He worked for
Yeah.
GCHQ.
I wonder how many people know this.
I don't know, a few I think, but not many. Yeah, Dad was a spy. So that was intriguing in itself. And I suppose we were brought up in an expat. So from world, I was born in Cyprus, and then we moved to India, where my sister Emma Craigie was born, and then we moved on to Turkey after that. So they were very different countries. And whilst we were part of the expat community, my dad's a real nonconformist and an adventurous guy. He still is. He's 82 and he's still really adventurous. And he would take us off on holidays to all sorts of places. So we went up the Khyber Pass to Afghanistan on one holiday. Gallipoli was a regular haunt to go on holiday. And so Dad very much, and Mum, but very much immersed us in the culture of those countries, okay. which was we were so lucky to have that experience.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get onto your interest in farming and ag and the rural sector in a bit, but first of all, I'm interested in where your fascination with people comes from.
That's a really good question. I think I have to say that comes from my dad. My dad, he's one of these people that will go into a room, and I share this passion, and whether it's nature or nurture, who knows, but Dad will go into a room, and if he'll talk to anybody, and if there's somebody on their own, my dad will go and speak to them, because they're on their own, and and he doesn't like people to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But he's really inquisitive. He wants to know why they're standing on their own, what's their story. And that's really infectious. When you're brought up around that, you become very similar. I'm really interested in culture. What makes people do the things that they do? Why do they behave in that way? And I think when you're brought up overseas, you learn that there's this layer of culture that pervades everything that somebody does, how they behave, and that equips you really well for life, doesn't it?
I mean, you wrote a piece for the Scottish Farmer in January this year, titled "A Letter to My Younger Self," and in that letter, you write of being, and I'm quoting here, a young woman full of insecurities and uncertainties about your place in the world. And you also write, and I quote, "Please shake that feeling that you need to conform. Your career will depend on you having the skill to think and do differently, to challenge the status quo." Let's delve into that. What kind of teenager were you?
I was shy, and I felt, I suppose, to give it a little bit of context, it was just after we came back from Turkey. I was just turning into a teenager, and so I'd been living this pretty free, bilingual existence, living and playing with Turkish kids and overlooking the Bosphorus and going to an international school. So there was, such a wide existence. Coming back to Somerset to a school, and I just didn't fit in. I felt like I didn't fit in, and that made me really insecure, because all that I had known, I didn't know anymore, and also I was behind in terms of schooling. Rich in life but behind in schooling, and that made me feel really insecure. And if we all must feel, you get to our age and stage in life, and you wish you had the confidence and the foresight that you have as an adult when you're that age, because actually all of those things that made me feel like I didn't fit in were the things that have made me what I am now, and fuel my passions and my interests.
Yeah. Let's turn to that interest in farming and ag, because you ended up actually working on some farms as well. Where does that come from, and where did that come from, and how did it start?
Really good question. I mean, it came from people, inspiring people. So we were when my dad and my mum both remarried, and my stepmom Elaine worked for a guy who had hunters, as in
Okay.
horses,
Yeah.
and in Somerset, and they had a beef, sheep, and arable farm.
Right.
And I used to start going down, as young girls do, sort of 15, 16, starting to help with horses. I'd never
Hmm.
ridden before in my life. And I just loved, I loved the landscape. I think they had such a diverse farm as well. I was really interested in how that all interrelated. And the guy that Elaine worked for was really into tree planting and planting hedges at a time back in the 80s,
Yeah.
when late 80s, when people weren't doing that.
Yeah.
So I just loved the way that he treated his land, and how everything integrated with one another. And I've always been interested in science, and I just had this sort of scientific interest, I suppose. Why does this happen? Why are you doing that? Why is that sheep lame?
Yeah.
And it really started from there. And I suppose something that's been a real part of my life throughout my life, and it's something that I try and give to others as well, is people that give you time to teach you when you're interested is one of the most important gifts. And I was so lucky that people around me at that time were prepared to give me time and teach me how to lamb a ewe, or to
Yeah.
pair a foot, or to to ride a horse.
Yeah.
And it was really just that I suppose the community, learning about agriculture, and suddenly it became the thing that I wanted to do.
Hmm. But I mean, before you started your own firm, and we're jumping ahead here,
Mm.
but you worked in a number of companies, a number of organisations, including Genus and DBT Limited, which is now part of ProAgrica. What did you learn from that time and those experiences, and what were you thinking going into those organisations?
Yeah, I mean, I did a degree in ag at Sealhain,
Yeah.
and came out of there not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I went into the milk round interviews that all colleges seem to
Yeah.
run. And I met a consultant called Mike Wilson, who worked for Genus. And we were talking, and he said, have you thought about a career in marketing? And I'd kind of thought about communications, but hadn't really given it much thought. And that was the beginning of the my interest. Think, God, I can combine my two passions. I actually did an A level in communications.
All right. Okay.
And environmental science was another A level, and
Yep.
biology.
Yep.
So I was kind of, those interests had been running through my life. And when I thought, God, I can combine these two interests, communications and agriculture. My first role was with Diversey Lever as a sort of in technical communications, supporting the sales team.
Yep.
But then I started working for Genus, and I thought that was an amazing organization. It combined all of the things that I have used through my career. So, animal production, supporting farmers with good advice, really caring about the businesses that you advise. And I worked for a great marketer, a guy called Stephen Dan, who really believed in training people. So I learned the comms profession from the ground up. I learned everything, writing press releases, buying advertising, desktop publishing, the whole lot. So I feel like I had a really good grounding from the opportunity that Genus gave me. And then DBT, so ProAgrica, the thing that I learned there that was just incredible was the way that different people could work together. So real techies that were focused on building websites and data, with somebody like me who's a real creative. But actually the complement was incredible, and what you could unlock in one another was amazing. And that's where I learned the power of technology and data, and that's it was really in its infancy. That was back in the 90s. And that stayed with me through my career, just the power of that.
And then you started Jane Craigie Marketing in 2004. mean, I think I'm fascinated with anyone who starts anything actually in many ways of any scale. But obviously, everything has to start somewhere. So, why did you start it? What was your vision for it, and who your clients in those early days?
The reason I started it was because was a lifestyle one. So my husband and I decided that we didn't want to live on the south coast of England anymore. We wanted to move to Scotland, and my dad and my stepmom were living up here, and so that kind of gave us an in. My family are from this area originally
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
so we knew the area. And one day Mike said, well, my husband, he said, why don't we move to Scotland? And I said, well, we can't. We know this is where our life is. And actually, the more we thought about it, we thought, well, actually, there's no reason why we couldn't. So we made the leap. We moved up here. And that was kind of the catalyst for starting it from a practical point of view. But the other thing that I really believed in, I'd worked agency side and I'd worked client side from a communication point of view. And one of the things, there was a couple of things that I still think are really important. I felt that some agencies could be really greedy. It's about the money. And somebody would come in who was very senior to do the pitch, and then would put a junior on the account.
yep,
And I didn't like that. I found that really uncomfortable. It's not about the money. It's about building long-term relationships and helping one another. So those were my foundations,
yeah.
really.
And that is still super clear with your entire client base today. That's what you're about in many ways.
Yeah, and it matters, doesn't it? It matters. You've got to make a difference. You can't just get up in the morning and think, oh, I'm going to make money out of doing this. You've got to. Well, I feel, how am I helping somebody?
Yeah.
In their careers, but also in their pain. So during COVID, it's been really painful for some people. And you've got to be there for people. So those are my basic, my values. I think it's not
Yeah.
about the money; it's about helping people.
Let's talk about PR in the industry generally, because I mean, for you, what is PR in a rural context, and is there anything that makes rural PR different from PR in an urban context?
I don't think. I think the stories are different in a
Yeah,
rural context, and I think the stories are what makes good rural PR. People's stories and the story of land and food
yeah,
and how it's managed. So I think the difference is that we have an amazing palette, if you call it, a palette of stories, or a shelf of stories and iconic images. So I think we're so lucky in a rural context, and that's in its widest sense, the rural economy, whether it's a food business, a forestry business, a farming business. We just have such a rich tapestry to weave into stories. So we're lucky. I think the principles are no different. The principles about who you're trying to talk to, what's your brand, what is your story, articulating it, thinking about what elements you want to talk about, and also being robust in your thinking. If you engage in your own PR, what is it you want to say, and do you know your stuff?
yeah,
So I think the principles, and then the channels that you use, that's a basic principle of PR. I think that the nice thing is, as time has gone on in the last decade, the channels open to us, the costs of doing your own PR have reduced markedly.
Hmm.
It's just about being smart and knowing how to tell your story.
And I listened to a podcast you did earlier this year with Scotland's Farm Advisory Service, and in that you talk of positive PR. What is that, and should all rural businesses be thinking about that?
I'm a great believer in being on the front foot. There's so much that you can do. There's so much opinion that you can change if you're positive about what you do. So often in agriculture, and it's a legacy thing. I think we become defensive about, we think that that consumers can be against us. There's so many issues, the glyphosate issue, that we've killed all the bees, that we're polluting watercourses. And so it's really easy to go into a situation feeling negative, and not not putting your best foot forward, but to come out on a positive. And one of my heroes is Adam Henson. I was at college with him, and I love him as a friend.
Were you? I didn't know that.
Yes, I've got many stories I could tell you, but he would shoot me. But that he's got a great way of coming out on the front foot, of thinking about how he's going to tell the story of. He calls lambing live. He called it a biological gynecological feast.
Yeah.
And he is really good at communicating it, warts and all. And I think it's he's a really good ambassador for positive PR.
Mm-hmm.
For farming and for rural businesses. We shouldn't be defensive. We should be proud of what we do as an industry. But the first thing that comes to the fore there is just getting our stories straight.
Let's change the subject and talk about the Rural Youth Project. As I said, we've mentioned it on the show before, but looking forward to going into detail. What is it for listeners who haven't by chance heard of it? And again, why did you start it?
The Rural Youth Project was I can remember sitting with my colleague Rebecca Dawes, who was my first employee, and she's just an amazing young woman. Anyway, I was sitting with her at T-Bay. We were driving to or from an event. I think it was from the cereals event, actually, coming back. Okay. And we were sat there, and I said, I've got an idea. And it was really based on the lack of information out there about young people in rural places. And so my idea was we should do some survey work to try and understand what it is young people feel, what they need, and really where they were in their optimism and how optimistic or pessimistic were they about their future. And so that's really where it started. But what it has evolved into is much, much bigger. So I think the timing of it 2.5 years ago to ask those questions, to a really, really long survey that asked people about housing and connectivity and skills and income. We had about just under 1,000 responses, and it was from young people all over the world. And it was the right time to ask them. And from it, what we wanted to do is to build the confidence of young people, their leadership skills, their activism skills, and their enterprise skills, because our belief, and I think it is well founded, that if young people feel that they can make a life in a rural place and they have the skills with which to build their own business, to feel like they can play their part in a community, then they'll stay.
Yeah.
And if you keep young people in rural areas, or if they decide to live in rural areas with them, it attracts investment, and the services remain, the schools stay open. So they are absolutely the lifeblood of rural places. And that's kind of why we started it.
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned that. Well, you've insinuated that it is sort of evolving. What are your ambitions for it at the moment?
Well, it's growing arms and legs. So as a result of the project, I'm now involved with a rural innovation project within OECD, and that's a reflection of how important rural youth is internationally, as well as here in a UK context. So we are getting involved with a lot of organizations on an international basis. We're talking about running, so one of the key strands of our activities has been ideas festivals. So really getting young people together for 4 days in a field, in a marquee, to share inspiring stories, to build up their confidence, and then throw them out into the world to basically get motoring.
I'd still love to come along and see how one of those sessions. You're just so far away.
Oh no, come. Well, we might have some in. We're talking to a couple of organisations in Australia, one in the US. So I think the model is hugely replicable.
Fantastic.
So yeah. So we're planning to do lots more ideas festivals, leadership training. We've been running ideas cafes during lockdown. And we're currently doing a lot with the Scottish government to look at how young people can be part of repopulation of rural Scotland rather than the depopulation of rural Scotland.
Amazing. So the farming sector is clearly, I think, from everything we're saying and everything you've seen, it is becoming better at its own PR, and this has been, and I suppose working with journalists, that's something you mentioned earlier on as well, and Anna Jones's Just Farmers program is a great example of this. But do you sense that some farmers maybe still have a slight distrust of journalists, or is that now a thing of the past?
I think they do, Ben. I think it's fair to say that they do. I think going back to that defensiveness that I mentioned earlier, it's completely understandable. And I think farmers are right to be concerned if they go into an interview with a journalist. If only that it makes, if they do go into an interview with a journalist, that they think about what they want to say. It's still possible for the rhetoric about farming, or they're paid too much subsidy and they're killing bees. It's still too. I think too often you see that creeping into some lazy journalism from a journalist perspective, and it's very easy for a farmer to get into, which is a no-win argument, and trip themselves up. So I think, my advice to farmers, if they are going to go into an interview situation, is know the journalist, talk to them first. Trust them, build a trust with them. So don't go into an interview unless you trust them and you are prepared.
Yeah.
But equally, I don't think they should have that fear, because those journalists that are following the old rhetoric of farmers are paid too much subsidy, or whatever the old guard might have thrown at farmers, I think those days are gone. There are some brilliant journalists out there who are genuinely interested.
What has social media done for rural businesses that they didn't have before?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think social media is just so powerful. Back at the beginning, we were talking about impacts of COVID, and social media has grown as a result of COVID. Channels like TikTok, which we were barely using, have now really come to the fore, and there's been some real stars that have been created on TikTok.
Yeah.
And who knew that could happen? So I think, the thing that I love about social media is that it's free, and you can put your opinion out there. And if you're good at it and you create good, compelling content, it can be hugely powerful. There are businesses, particularly diversified farm businesses, that maybe have holiday accommodation or farm shops. The bulk of their marketing is done on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
At the only cost is a little bit of time. And that's hugely powerful. That isn't it?
Yeah, no. So let's talk about Instagram, because I know that you're a particular fan of it. How would you recommend a farmer who's looking to promote their business starts with Instagram? So,
I think before you start, think about just create a plan, just on a piece of paper. So, what do I want to promote? So it's my farmhouse B&B, or it's my farm shop. What are the things that I'm really good at? So we do great breakfasts. It's all stuff from the farm, and we source from within 2 miles. Everything else comes from within 2 miles. So what's your story?
I'm sold. I'm there.
Yeah, but that's the compelling stuff, isn't it? So
exactly.
and so often you see people and they just think, they get into social media and you think, oh, where are you going with that? And it's just not curated enough. I don't like the word, but it is really important to know what your story is, have a plan, and then just get started. And Instagram is brilliant because you can tell a story, and you use it really well as well. And you great images. I mean, you use fabulous pictures of people.
Oh, thank you. Because I mean, I was going to say, I mean, personally, I was actually having this conversation with Will last week, and we were both saying we are terrible when it comes to Instagram. There's so much more that we both could do, but it's what I struggle with social is, especially if you find a platform that's working for you, and then you go for it, and then something else happens in your life, and then you go off it, and then it's how you build that regularity of momentum, which I find difficult.
Well, I mean, I'm like you though, Ben. I don't, I don't practice what I preach enough because I'm too busy.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it?
but I think Instagram is just, going back to that rich tapestry. You were asking about rural PR earlier on. That rich tapestry of stories that every farm has. That sense of place, the history of that farm, that land, that oak tree, that stream, that where you had your first kiss, and where just so rich, isn't it? And if you could bottle that into Instagram, which is what JR from Strictly, he does so well.
He really does. He's genius at it.
Yeah. And with these mobile, with the smartphones we have now, I've just bought myself an iPhone 11 because I'm too tight to buy a 12. But the reason I bought it is for the camera. The camera is amazing on it.
Okay, that is because I'm considering going back to iPhone, and I need a new phone, so I might take you up on that. Okay.
Yeah, but it's easily done. I think just invest in a good iPhone or a good phone, a good smartphone, and just and appreciate what's around you. Think about what's around you and appreciate what's around, and share it.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question that Will often asks on Rock and Roll Farming. Sorry, Will, I'm stealing it just for the time being. But if someone who's not involved in agriculture asked you to recommend them a farming account to follow on Twitter or Instagram, what would it be and why?
I love Hilltop Farm Girl, Lee and Neil Heseltine. They farm up in Malham in North Yorkshire, and or Yorkshire Dales, sorry. I just love what they do. They tell the story of their place, their livestock, their beliefs in how they farm. They've got a bunkhouse, so they tell the story about their bunkhouse, and it's so compelling. You want to go and stay there. And I just love the way they tell the story of themselves and the place that they live and the land that they work, the heritage of it. So yeah, that would be one of my go-tos, I think.
Okay. We're almost done, but we always finish the podcast with the same two questions, which I'm going to ask you now. First is, if you had a message for the public, any message, what would it be and why?
I think COVID has started us on this journey. I think my message to the public would be really inquisitive about your food. Who produced it? How did they produce it? Why did they produce it? To learn about the people behind your food. And if it doesn't look like food, real food, don't buy it.
Finally, a message for farmers.
Yeah, I think for farmers, farming has become cool. And during, the same point about the public are interested in food.
Yeah.
So don't be defensive, get out there. And the most important thing you have to sell and to tell is your own story and why you do what you do. And I suppose the other thing I would say to all farmers out there, don't defend the indefensible. There are some farmers out there that aren't practicing things as we all think that they should. I'm not saying call it out on social media, because I think that could be really damaging for the industry, but call it out in person. We've got to we must deal with the indefensible, because it will damage our reputation going forward.
Yeah. Well, Jane, it's been a pleasure. We'll have to leave it there because otherwise I'm gonna have way too much editing to do. But honestly, I would love to continue this conversation for another hour, but we can't. But thank you so much for coming on. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking me, Ben. It's been absolutely lovely to see you and talk to you.
Meet the farmer's friends.
Jane Craigie, who I spoke to last week. Next time, I'll be speaking to Leicestershire arable and beef farmer Joe Stanley. So I hope you can join me then. But until then, have a great week ahead.